Hi, I'm Kate McGinn and I'm a grad student here at UW-Madison. Right now I'm in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm on a hike looking at plants and animals and learning a little bit more about the forest ecosystem. An ecosystem is a system of living and non-living things. The plants around me, the birds, even my dog here are part of the living ecosystem. Non-living parts of the ecosystem are the stream behind me, some of the rocks and dirt around me, and even the mountain itself. An ecosystem is a system of interacting parts. An example of these interacting parts can be seen in a food chain. Sunlight enters the system as energy, and producers, like plants, turn this energy into food. Consumers come in and eat the plants. These are first-level consumers. My dog here is an example of a second-order consumer, when she eats some of the bugs she finds in the ground. If we want to learn more about the ecosystem, it's a really complex system, and these interactions can be difficult to follow. One way to study the ecosystem at a smaller scale is to look at a microcosm.
Microcosms are artificial, simplified ecosystems used to simulate and predict the behavior of natural ecosystems. Scientists can use open and closed microcosms to do experiments to learn more about more complex systems.
In this video today, we're going to teach you how to build your own microcosm with materials from your backyard. We're also going to teach you how to do experiments to learn about the backyard system you're in. We look forward to working with you today, and we hope that you have a lot of fun with us.
Hello, I'm Kristen. I'm a PhD student at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm here to teach you the fun part of making a microcosm. Now, before we can go outside and start getting our materials, we need to know what those are. So we're going to need some water from a natural source, so like a lake, a river, a pond, a creek. We're also going to need a bunch of other things, so like dead leaves, some mud and sand, some rocks, hopefully with some bugs on it, and of course some like algae or some grass that's living in the water. All right, so there's a couple of things we're going to need in order to get those things. So of course, in order to make the microcosm, we're going to need a nice clear jar. So this jar for me is a used up candle with all the wax taken out of it and cleaned up. We're going to also need some Tupperware. I have a couple just to get those sands and rocks. Or if you don't have Tupperware, you can also use some plastic bags. All right, now that we have all of our resources gathered, let's go outside. All right, now that we're back inside, let's start putting this microcosm together. So I was able to get some water from the outside. I was also able to get some leaves and nice algae, just from picking it up on the surface of the water. I was also able to get some nice sediment, rocks and mud and sand, just by scraping along the bottom. Another neat find was also this nice little clamshell that I was able to get. So that's pretty awesome. All right, so basic assembly is pretty straightforward. And trying to stay relatively clean, I have everything on this nice little paper towel, but also you can go ahead and do this assembly right on outside so you don't have to bring everything inside. All right, so the first step, I'm going to take this little clamshell out of here. So the first step is to get all of your nice sediment, rocks, and mud all along the bottom. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my hands. And if you're a little squeamish and don't want to touch all the rocks and sand, you can also do this by using like a plastic spoon. So I'm just going to use my hands and kind of scrape all this sand and mud outside of the container and just let it fall to the bottom. And we basically want about 1 inch or 2 inches deep of this sand and mud layer. That's looking pretty good. So you can see it's pretty uniform throughout. And it's already starting to get a little bit cloudy of all that sand and mud. Don't worry, after a little while, all of that sand and mud is going to drift down to the bottom, and it'll be nice and clear again. Now, moving on to our algae. So we want to put all this nice algae and leaves in our microcosm as well, because this will be a nice source of oxygen for all of our microbes and other little critters that are in there. So we can grab this algae. And we're basically just going to want to put this in very gently. We don't want to break it. And I like to kind of smoosh it down into the bottom, sort of into that sediment layer a little bit, just as an anchor. Moving on to like our little leaves. We're just going to take them And we don't want to super crowd our microcosm because we want to kind of see what's going on inside. So I'm just going to take them and I'm just going to sort of fold them in there and just kind of let them find their place on their own. Very nice. All right. Almost assembled. That's pretty much it. So I have this little clamshell as one last little thing, and I'm just going to put this in here simply as a nice little decoration. It'll also be a nice substrate for anything that likes to swim around and stick on things. And maybe there's still some bits of clam left over that anything can still eat and munch on. All right, and that's basically it. So we now have our nice, beautiful microcosm all assembled, and it looks pretty great if I say so myself.
Now that we've seen how to make a microcosm, let's learn about how we can use them to set up experiments and see what we can add or take away to change the animals and plants we find in them. What do I mean by an experiment? Well, it depends on what kind of scientist you're talking to, but I'm defining an experiment as a study used to test a hypothesis, where a hypothesis is a proposed explanation of a trend that I see, or an expected result if some change is made. You can definitely do any number of experiments with your microcosm, but I want to give some examples of hypothesis-driven experiments you can do pretty easily at home. The first is adding fertilizer, which contains nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, to our microcosm, to see if it will change the kind of plants and animals we see. Why do I care if fertilizer has an effect on the organisms found in this microcosm? Well, the lakes around Madison, like Lake Mendota, where I got the water for this microcosm, are surrounded by farms that add a lot of fertilizer and nutrients to their crops. This fertilizer tends to run off of the fields when it rains and ends up in our lakes, so I'm interested in whether or not this changes the life found in these lakes. I can now test this on a lot smaller scale with this microcosm. If you're looking for a fertilizer but aren't sure what to look for, just check the back. It'll have nitrogen and phosphorus, usually in the form of phosphate. That'll work. So I've added fertilizer to this microcosm. Am I done? Not quite. Since I want to see how fertilizer changes the life in this microcosm, I need something to compare it to. Say, a microcosm that I didn't add fertilizer to, but kept pretty much everything else the same. In science, we call this a control. So I will label each of these my control, where I didn't add fertilizer, and the microcosm that I did add fertilizer, and now be able to compare any changes I see in the microcosm with fertilizer compared to the one without it. Another experiment I can do is test how the plants and animals in this microcosm respond when I put them in the freezer for a short amount of time and then take them back out. What's my observation that would lead me to test this experiment? Well, with climate change, cold and warm weather in the spring is becoming more unpredictable. So I suspect we may get more late spring freezes in the future. What effect will this have on organisms in the lakes around Madison? I don't really know, but we can use our microcosm to find out. But remember, we want to include a control to compare what we see in this microcosm to a microcosm we haven't changed. These are just a couple of the experiments that you could do pretty easily at home with your microcosm. The possibilities are practically endless, and that, to me, is what makes experimenting and doing science so much fun.
So, what did you all learn today? You learned what a microcosm is, you learned about the plants and animals you can put in it, you learned how to make a microcosm, and you even learned how to perform your own experiments from home. My favorite part about doing this little project is that it makes me appreciate the nature that surrounds me. When I live somewhere for a long time, sometimes I forget to look closely at what's around me. Making a microcosm not only makes me appreciate the amazing and diverse life that's nearby, but also inspires me to ask questions about my environment, so I can use my scientific mind to do interesting experiments and try and figure out the answers. We hope you're inspired to learn as much as you can about the plants and animals that you found in your local environment and how cool they are. Have fun with your personal microcosm and try all different kinds of creative experiments so you can make your own discoveries. Thanks for watching.